Sorry for the delay, it's been a complicated week. I thought it would be worthwhile looking at, so we've met the activists that have first begun to say, actually, austerity will provide us with a political opportunity. And we've got the environments where they are, so we've got the Labour Party, we've got the trade unions, we've got the Guardian, we've got student politics up and down the country, and what they're going to use is the erosion of these institutions that I'm talking about. So I'm kind of very much facing this transformation and understanding what it is coming from system failure, whereas they have seen austerity as an opportunity. Now, I've got a friend called Bianca who I went to the LSE with, and she was telling me that she started out as a journalist at about this time, and she was told to use Twitter as the new water cooler to build networks and contacts. So these people were being told that Twitter was the new greasy pole to climb. I was not told any such thing. I was just there because it was like, I don't know, a move on from baby forums, I think. And I think my daughter was that young. So this is the first time this class will be meeting kind of people like me. And I think what's also worth understanding is they would have no reason to know that somebody with my perspective exists. So the function that I've fulfilled is to reflect on policy failure, and it's a relatively new function that's evolved at the arse end of the system. So this has evolved in the 20th century, and these two things function as long as they don't meet. So Labour are at this point moving into a digital environment during a period in time where an abusive reflex has to happen in policy as a reflex response to the financial crisis. The demographics most likely to be using the internet with them are mothers with kids, because we're the ones who are on the internet during the day while we're trying to stay awake and not go mad at our kids. So there's two different things happening at the same time here, and one of them kind of lands on my head. Now, I've never viewed left and right tribalism as anything but what it is, which is empty tribalism that kind of drives the top layer of stuff. And, you know, we're a very, very stable country. I reflect the systems which reflect the rule of law, and these reflect kind of a media culture. And clearly there are some issues here, because all of a sudden they don't have broadcast anymore. There's feedback. So the legacy identity of the Labour Party is something to do with direct democracy comes into play. And this is where I start to meet these people. So I, at this point, assume that my trade unions know that A, the cuts that are going to hit local authorities are not deliverable, and B, that it's about the rule of law covering all these people and it's subject to consensus. I assume that the trade union covering our cash transfer system knows this. So I have no reason at this point. But from Labour's perspective, they have to transition to a digital environment. They have a classification of the working class, which is largely about welfare policy and fitting around that welfare economics I talked about. So they divide the working class between the deserving and the undeserving, the deserving being the male white working class who are in work, and the deserving being the rest of us, i.e. women, ethnic minorities, people who use social policy systems. So this is the division that they think that they are going to be able to transition. But what they haven't reflected on is that their ability to combine this economics and their so-called principles before has largely relied on broadcast and a media environment where they can do that. And they've not really thought about the structure of how they've done this, because they're structurally unable to reflect on power, they're structurally unable to reflect on identity. These two things, this left-wing identity and this kind of political identity, is at the core of all these structures that I've come into contact with. And to me this is alien, because I come from a system where we have learned a long time ago that if you don't reflect on power and identity, one thing will happen and one thing only, and that's abusive relations. So they're in an environment where they have a social dimension which they can't see, because they're concerned with this identity. And so very, very early on, they basically start to realise that I'm not going to discuss left and right, because I need to discuss political consensus on the erosion of these institutions and the consensus at the core of our economics. And so what they do then is they're using a written chronological record, demonstrate how they will produce that consensus by attacking anybody who injures their identity, imposing their identity on all these different structures, and using abuse to sell austerity. And so by identifying as opposing these changes and then building an abusive chat room around themselves, they demonstrate that their function is to be the seal to the status quo, and they still demonstrate this. And because they're not a culture who exist in isolation online, they're connected to institutions who already do this, they'll just keep going round and round and round and round in circles, which is what they're doing. But initially, they were very much about preventing discussion of austerity. So the first thing you notice is everywhere you go to speak, because I was being invited to speak at a lot of places at this point. And whenever you started to talk about welfare policy or local authority policy, there'd be somebody in the audience from Labour trying to keep you on the conversation about how Labour turned left is that narcissistic thing we have to keep you talking about our identity. And this is how they did it. So I had figured out quite early on that that was the case, and I was watching them reproduce their identity over austerity and using social media, and quite interested in what they were revealing about how social networks come from elite institutions, because this had been a group of students from Oxford. So I figured, okay, I started to take them at face value. They never said outright we won't be opposing austerity. One of them declared me a scab. That was fun. I had the entire British left on me, including an anti-fascist target in my house. And the regular routine for this, to devalue somebody using Twitter, is to kind of hold them up to this purity politics so that a mob can go after them. And sometimes these mobs would be weeks long. And underneath them there would be really, really scary people. And I had, 2 fairly committed stalkers. But I still took the platform that they offered. I still wrote for the New Statesman, I still wrote for the Guardian. But they were beginning to realise, because there had been, what the story of the left is throughout this time of them trying to co-opt media narratives. So if you look on Liberal Conspiracy and look at conversations and threads between Sonny Handel and Owen Jones during Occupy, that's a really good example. Because spontaneous street politics had emerged, they had to manufacture the appearance of it using Twitter. And they were very threatened by this. And in fact, when I went to Occupy, Shiv Malik had tried to leak details of the occupation's aims to Lord Glasmer in an attempt to triangulate on the occupation. And they didn't understand that all Occupy was a symptom that existing political parameters are failing worldwide. And that this happens during periods of history. Pony debates is another one. Street politics emerges because of existing political paradigms are breaking down, and what the left were was really frightened of this. And the development of AstroTurf throughout this time to project the left identity onto austerity was revealed during this time to also include our trade unions. And now, with the turf thing, they want dominion over women even speaking online, and you've got fucking Sean Fay out stalking mums now, and the feminists around the left going, yeah, we think women's freedom of assembly should end, and we think women shouldn't be allowed boundaries anymore, and we don't think women should be allowed to discuss these systems. And over the 8 years since we meet them, what we see is a political culture who are relying on being hidden on broadcast, trying to adapt to an environment with a social dimension during a period where the rule of law will be undermined using these massive institutions, and now they're caught into a bubble. So before thinking this is just about slagging off the left, while it is of concern because they are on the brink of down history, this is actually a really important thing that they've created on Twitter around themselves, because they've created an 8-year living document of what happened when a mediating class started to generate instability at the end of a cycle. So the observation and the fact that this is such a small social network allowed over 8 years that to be demonstrated. And because they were protecting a false identity, they've done it openly and confidently. So their records are there to do that. So that's what these videos are intended to do, really, to show you what that process is, rather than kind of having to go at any particular member of the left.